pleasure and honor to be with you. When Joel and Natasha say to show up at something, I show up. So, be a bunch of smart, good people. So, thank you all for being here. And I'm glad Eric did the heavy lifting. He's a little humble. He says when the private sector shows up, some people even say we can be helpful. I don't know what else there is other than the private sector in terms of being helpful, right? We're way too modest. And so, thank you for all you do. Now, we're about ready to do taxes coming up, right? We've done a wonderful job on healthcare, and now we're heading to detect the cynicism there. It's like I got a smart audience. So now we're going to head toward taxes. That one we cannot goof up, right? That one we have to deliver. And I taught economics, Econ 101, everything, economic justice. I taught it all, right? Third world development, whatever. And demand curve and supply curve. And we're going to do supply side tax cuts, right? Corporate rate reduction, highest in the world, down to 20, we hope. It was 15, now it's edging up. It's getting me nervous. But when you go to do that, then the left and the newspapers, mainstream media mocks you immediately. Supply side, trickle down, right? And so I have to remind people, I say, wait, you can stimulate the demand side, right? You give people money, that, they'll do a little bit. But the demand curve is all you, right? Consumers, your demanders. And the supply curve is everybody that goes to work in the morning. So I tell the press they're part of the supply curve and they freak out, right? So the supply curve is every business and everyone that sets an alarm clock and everyone that goes to work. And so the American people are cranky right now for the last 40 years, and now it's building to a crescendo. Everyone's really cranky. And why is that? Because wage rates have been flat for 40 years. And so why are wage rates flat for 40 years? Do we just say what we'd like the wage rate to be? No. For the past 200 years, the wage rate graph is the exact same graph as the productivity graph. It's the same graph, right? Output per worker per hour, however you want to do it. That is the wage rate. You don't get to make stuff up. So if you want to really increase people's wages, you just don't dictate and say, well, let's have a minimum wage of so-and-so. You don't get to make up a wage rate, right? You have to increase productivity. Well, who does productivity? The demand side or the supply side? The supply side, right? So I mean, this is Econ 101. And so if you want to incentivize productivity growth, you have to incentivize the supply side, and then wage rates will go up, right? And that's what we're all praying for. And so I'm a professor, so I just went off on a tangent. That has nothing to do with talk, right? So the talk has to do with the rule of law and all the foundations and institutions that made us great. I did my PhD on cross-country economic growth at American up here. Studied Doug North. He won a Nobel Prize for property rights of the institutions that have served us well. And then if you really want to get it, you can read Deidre McCloskey. And she is just super honest. And she goes through about 20 Nobel papers, and she takes them all on, one by one by one, the causes of economic growth, right? So 1800, up to 1800, all of human history, everybody made about $500 a year per person. Every country, every culture, doesn't matter. Up, right from whatever, dinosaurs up to 1800. Then at 1800, you get explosive economic growth in the West, starting off in the Western European countries. And so why did that happen? And so the usual economic argument is capital accumulation, human capital, the Industrial Revolution, science, maybe property rights, natural endowment of resources, Marxist explanations of exploitation, etc. And most of those are true, right? There's a lot. Capital accumulations usually are number one. McCloskey says no. She goes down all of them, 20 papers in a row. In her second volume. Her book's called Bourgeois Virtue, if you want to go look it up. And her thesis is what caused long-run economic growth is when, for the first time in human history, the moral language changed, such that we started calling the businessman and the businesswoman morally good. That's a shocker, right? So you go back through the Western canon or the Eastern canon, it doesn't matter, right? Go back to Abraham and Moses and Jesus and St. Augustine and St. Thomas and etc., or Plato and Aristotle and the whole, right, Hobbes, Spinoza, whoever you want to go to. And what do they say about money in capitalism and business and markets? Well, you kind of need them so you can build a nice art collection or something like that, right? But business itself is not moral in and of itself, right? You kind of put up with it, you need it. The rich class needs it so they can have a life of leisure, but it's not intrinsically morally good. And that changed somewhere in the 1700s. She got a double PhD. She's a Chicago school economist, right? She's got the right credentials. So she shows in the literature and the novels and everything, the moral language change, and it's fascinating, right? And so today this matters because what are we teaching you young people? How many people in the room are young? Raise your hand if you're young. Very good. How many of you feel young? Right? You feel young. What are we teaching the kids in K-12? Is business morally good? Or not so sure, right? Higher ed, I can tell you what we teach the students. Across the board, the liberal arts faculty, business is the bad guys, right? So what a terrible message to send to young people, right? You're going to set your alarm clock at 6 a.m. every day for the rest of your life, and what you're engaged in is morally questionable. There's a downer, right? So why does this matter? Because if you don't have the institutions right, this thing is reversible. So if the moral vision of business being morally good and worthwhile and part of your calling, or however you want to call it, if you don't believe that, guess what you should expect? In the last quarter, we grew at 0.7% GDP growth, and over the last 8 years, it's been 2%. And in my parties, right, we haven't been doing our job either, so it's not just a partisan thing. So I've got a book that lays out all this stuff and my best hits. Teaching college for 18 years, and so I laid what I call the 3 pillars that made our country successful. And so number 1 is the Judeo-Christian tradition, without which, in our tradition, you don't get the other 2, in my view, it could be. And note I say the tradition, right? It's not the religion. You can argue on that matter, but the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? You got Abraham and faith, and God creates all people from all countries in God's image, right? The Enlightenment, and no philosopher in Western civ has explained where you get the dignity of man from very well. They can assert it. Kant, the end of the Enlightenment, did about as good a job as reason can do on its own, but it's kind of a circular logic, right? So where do you get this idea that humanity in itself deserves some dignity? And it's kind of the secular schools, Jefferson, you think of our founders, etc., kind of Enlightenment guys. They're great on some scores, but on that fundamental piece, I think you got to have it. And then Judeo-Christian, you get Moses, right? 10 Commandments, rule of law, kind of emerges out of that tradition and into pillar number 2, the rule of law itself. And so you get Magna Carta, and you get my guy from Virginia, James Madison, who went to Princeton Seminary. Are you all paying attention? Wake up. That's my bragging point. Right? It was a college in New Jersey, right? But he stuck around undergrad and studied what? Just for kicks. First graduate student in Hebrew. Huh. Did they teach you young kids that in school? No. So the author of the Constitution studied what? No one has a clue. Right? It seems like it might matter, right? The fundamental document that undergirds our civilization, the Constitution, and no one knows anything about the architect or the worldview embedded in that Constitution. Right, so Madison is the first great mind, and if you have his view of the world, and in the Hebrew tradition, how long does it take for humanity to fall off a bit? In the first place, are we all angels in the Hebraic tradition, or a little bit fallen? I'm a Calvinist, so in the Calvinist tradition, if that helps you, we're quite fallen, right? In the good book, how long does it take us to go not good? Genesis 2. Genesis is the first book for you illiterates right there. I think you all know this, you're just looking blank, because you're not supposed to talk about this in public, right? So human nature's fallen. If that is snake in the apple and all this stuff, right, you know all this stuff. And if human nature's fallen and you're going to design a government rationally, how might you set up that government? Well, if you were smart, you would divide power every which way you can. And that's what Madison did. Federal government with 18 enumerated powers. All other powers go to the states and to the people. That's in the Constitution. Right? I mean, no one knows any of this stuff anymore, right? Now the federal government's doing everything. Right? There's cranes out there. We're in charge of every aspect of your life. And how are we doing? Not so hot. So there's vertically and then horizontally at the federal level, he separated judicial, legislative, executive. Separation of power. How are we doing on that one? We centralize all power in the president and the executive, because we need to win our next election and we don't want a hard vote. Right? So all power is up here in DC in one person, and that's starting to sound like 2,000 years of history. Right? And all regimes over 2,000 years of history, how did they do? They all collapsed because of an overemphasis on the federal level, right? Kings and despots and tyrants and whatever. Right? So the rule of law matters fundamentally. And then if you're really lucky, you get 1776, you don't only get Jefferson, Madison, all these guys, you get a guy across the pond named Adam Smith. There's an across the pond guy right over here, right? You familiar with Adam? Adam Smith, right? Founder of free markets. And his logic in economics is the same logic as James Madison in the political sphere. In Madison's logic, he wanted a large number of small factions, that's the word he used, right? Large number of small factions competing against each other. The opposite has emerged, right? We have monopolies of power up here in this city. And so you shouldn't expect the best outcomes. Adam Smith, Enlightenment, same exact logic. Smart people come up with similarly great ideas. For Adam Smith, what he, in pure competition was over here, and monopolies over here. In pure competition, what do you want? A large number of small firms duking it out. What do you have today in the insurance market? A few biggies. Banks, a few biggies. You see a little trend here? You don't have a large number of small businesses duking it out. And that's what gives you the best outcomes, right? Lower prices, higher quantity, better quality, etc. So all that goes together, right? I mean, and all of this is premised upon having immoral people. How are we doing on morality? In K-12, do we teach any ethical system that you're aware of? Not that I know. Higher ed, any required readings? Higher ed, any ethical schools of thought? I'm a liberal arts guy, so I taught them all, right? I taught every system there was. That's what the liberal arts is supposed to do, right? This open inquiry into all great ideas. But today, we're not teaching kids about business, and we're not teaching them ethics. And so I'm glad these guys are doing the heavy lifting, right, with the case studies and the business applications on the ground, and I applaud you guys for all the work you do. I just wanted to give you a little of the superstructure up there, the 30,000-foot liberal arts professor language. But Joel told me to hit on a few. I think I hit on most points, right? Rule of law, transparency, freedom, protecting free speech, individual liberty, private property. Why should you have free speech? Well, why should you have liberty? Right? And all of it goes back to first principles, because at some sense, you are valuable as an individual, right? And how do you know that? How do you know you're valued as an individual? Can you argue that in the public space? Or can a dictator come along with another argument and win the day? I hope not, right? So that's my encouragement. All of this matters tremendously. Having this conversation matters tremendously, and so I applaud you all for being here. And that's all I got to say. Thank you very much, Joel and Natasha. Thank you all.